Welcome back. We are here today to have some honest conversation, and I have a guest. The first time I've had a guest. Terry, you're the first guest on my podcast. I just realized that.
Oh,
And
yay.
yeah, and like no better person than to be a first guest on my podcast. This is Terry Peterman. He and I have been, he gave me a bio, but you guys, I'm just going to like introduce you to him. He and I have been friends, what, like 25 years?
25 years now.
Like that. Yeah. So we met in grad school. I gotta tell a little bit of story, and then I'll do the credential stuff and introduce you for real. But so Terry and I was working on my PhD. Terry, you were just starting your master's, I think, maybe?
Yeah. And I might even have been an undergraduate the first time I met you working in the writing center.
I think so. So, you guys, he's going to give me heck about it, and he has for years, but so I'm like a lot older than he is, but we met in college. And the real reason that we got to be tight friends is because of one of our professors who I know we both love, Dr. Donna Dunbar Odom.
DDO.
So she introduced us because she actually paired us up. She kind of like paired you up with me as you were learning to teach composition at the university level. And so you helped with my my writing students, my comp students. And we just became fast friends and have been friends for all these years and have worked together, beyond that. After graduating, we worked together some at different colleges. And Terry is just, I'll tell you, and if you're listening on the podcast, you won't be able to see him blush, but no joke, like Terry is a ride or die friend. He's one of the best human beings that I know. He's a wonderful person. He's a great friend. He's an amazing support and as a spouse to his beautiful wife, Crystal. And he's got a really cool Katie Bug daughter who he's an amazing dad to. And so I just think the world of him. So we started together in university in higher education, worked together, like I said, and then he has also transitioned in his career to being a financial advisor. And that's what he's really here to talk about today. So I have to say that it makes so much sense for your career to have evolved in this way, because I know that just part of who you are is helping people. Like it was students, now it's people with finances. And really, like at his core, Terry is the kind of person who he wants to make a difference in the lives of people. And now he's making a difference in the lives of families by helping them do financial planning. And I know you have kind of specialized in educational planning for families, planning for their kids' educations, and in planning for retirement. And that's what I want us to talk about today and why I really invited him, because we're going to have an honest conversation about the inequities around women and money, specifically as it relates to, like, my listeners are women in their 40s and 50s and beyond. And we don't want to work until we're 100 before we can retire, right? And the reality is we need to have a frank conversation around how women over 40 and especially over 50 are most often really not financially prepared to be well off in retirement. When you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some evidence to bear that out. And I mean, I want to resist the urge to paint with broad strokes and, confirm negative stereotypes, because a lot of times you'll hear that women aren't as good with money or they don't know how to budget. And that's not necessarily true. A lot of times women are actually the more savvy savers and the better budgeters. However, I think where there's might be a little bit of difference is that men tend to be stronger at networking and building bonds with other people to share ideas about retirement and finances. Studies show that women are often much more reluctant to discuss their finances and even work with a financial advisor. Fidelity did a study last year that said like only 41% of women work with a financial advisor. And, when you compare that to 77% of men, that right there alone can lead to a drastic difference in how comfortable you are to retire, because on average, working with a financial advisor will provide you 3 to 5% more return annually on your portfolio. which,
Yeah,
you say, 3 to 5% doesn't sound like much, but when you compound that over 25 years, on
for
a hundred
sure.
thousand, $250,000, a million, those are thousands of dollars that are not going in your account.
Well, and let's dig in a little bit there because you've said
Mhm,
several things that like pique my
mhm,
interest. And I don't
mhm,
want to, paint with broad strokes either, but there's some real evidence as to why, like you're talking
mhm,
about why women aren't as set up to be
mhm,
financially secure as men. And one
mhm,
of it, you said we don't talk about money as much. And really, like that's cultural. Like we're
mhm,
taught at a young age that you don't talk about how much money you make, you don't talk
mhm,
about how much money you have. That's not ladylike to do
mhm,
that. There's a lot of cultural, familial kinds of
mhm,
teaching that go into that. And then I think when you pair that with the fact that in a lot of ways, there's
mhm,
inequity in salaries, there's,
mhm,
the longevity of your career can be shortened because of maybe
mhm,
like, staying home to have kids and take care of them. So, employment issues as it relates to finances
mhm,
are a huge hurdle. And I'll say something else about that too. So like we're also, not only are we not taught about working with financial
mhm,
planners, and we're taught to kind of keep our mouths shut about money because you don't want to brag about how much money you
mhm,
have, right? Or complain about
mhm.
how you don't. But in addition to that, we are not as good at negotiating as high a salary as it's expected that men will come in
Absolutely.
and negotiate, but you shouldn't do that, right?
Right.
There's a lot around that keeps
There
our
is.
salary lower.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'll say about the social aspect is with my guy friends, I've got a really tight group of 10 to 12 friends that I finished college with, and we get together every year for annual fantasy draft. And I have always just been really frank with, like, we have discussed how much money are you making? How much money are you making? And it's not like a contest where you're trying to one up each other. It's like, am I being paid what you're being paid?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not. Like, there's a drastic difference. Oh, well, I need to go talk to my boss, because if you're at L3 or you're Raytheon or you're here, and I'm making this and you're making that, we have those discussions all the time. But when I've worked with females in higher ed, that conversation has been very, very different, where it's exactly what you talk about. There's not as much comfort in doing that. And it usually has to be in a small setting, like
Yeah.
one-on-one, where somebody feels secure. The
Yeah.
second thing that I would say too is exactly what you said. Studies show that women are less likely to do two things: ask for a raise and change jobs. And so women will typically not be as assertive and go in and say, hey, this is the amount of money I want, and this is the amount of money I need to live on. And then if you don't give it to them, they're like, okay, I'm just going to look for another job. For instance, Business Insider did a study in 2018, and the average man will have three distinct careers in his life. He'll have a career that's like 18 to 30, and then he'll have one that's like 30 to 44, and then he'll have one that's 45 to retirement. And the first one is typically kind of like what he's doing when he first gets out of college. And then he'll have like a long set career there in the middle, where he might be changing jobs a little bit, but it's a bulk where he stays and he's moving up in the organization.
In the
And
same
then
field,
yeah,
especially.
it's in the same field. And then the last one will be where either they get downsized, or they, maybe make too much money for whatever reason. They'll have a solid retirement, and then they'll start a new career,
Yep.
a second career to supplement. And so the average man will have 7 jobs in his lifetime, but the average woman will only have 3.7 jobs over her lifetime.
Yeah.
And so, because I'll be honest, we one of the reasons I love you is I could always call you and say, hey, like, we could talk about this kind of stuff. And I'd be like, oh man, well, maybe I need to find another job, because I remember being a young dean
Yeah.
when I started out, and I was at a community college, and you helped me get ready for that first dean's job. And you were like, hey, look, at these are the salary criteria. These are the things that you need to be looking about. These are benefits. Do they have a separate retirement? And, if you don't have a strong friend group that you can have those type of
Yeah.
discussions, you simply don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I appreciate you, bringing that up. And I know it's something that you value.
Mm,
And there again, it's, me as a female who has a male friend who values that. Now, the
mm,
flip side of that for me in my professional life has been that I always was the one to ask for money and negotiate, just like
mm,
my male counterparts.
mm,
That wasn't so that wasn't considered a valuable trait about me from an employer
Absolutely.
perspective, right? So when I'm sitting across the table from, let's just say hypothetically, I'm, negotiating with a president who may have been hiring me for a vice presidency, and I'm asking for more money, I could tell that I was treated differently when I did successfully obtain that position, but I didn't get it at the salary that I asked for. And then subsequently, I find out that all my male counterparts at the same level were making at least 10 to 15, sometimes $20,000 more a year, even though I had more responsibility within the role. And so and I think that's pretty prevalent among women in different career fields. And you think about higher education, where we both were for the longest time, people think of education as more of a female dominated career, when in some ways it is, but the higher you go in those positions, the more male dominated that field becomes. And I think, just again, kind of in a very general way, when women who are in more male dominated fields, that's even more difficult for them. And they can get labeled as, being a bitch, or like, really like trying to be hardcore, and take some negative backlash over trying to up their salary, or even get to a place where they have an equal pay for the job that they're doing. And all of these kinds of things, I think, create a situation where, as we get into our 50s, and, when you're in your 30s, you don't really think about retirement that much. Unfortunately, we don't. We're just trying to get in, get promoted, get the best job that we can get, and move up. But as we get into our 50s, all of these things stack in a way that puts us at a real disadvantage when we're looking toward retirement. I know it was for me when I was looking at retiring in 2020. There were several things that really put a hiccup in that, and I had to be pretty smart and savvy about how to make that happen for me. And still, a lot of what we're talking about hurt me in the long run. And he was one that was aware of it and on top of it, right? And trying to do the best I can. So a lot of women I know are sitting there in their 50s and really thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Right? Like, how am I ever going to retire? I have a friend who's in higher education, and she's told me this job is not about retirement. There's no way that I'll ever be able to retire because of all the things that we're talking about. Right. And so I think it's a really interesting conversation to have, and women need to be encouraged to be much more vocal about money. And like you said, talk to each other about it, compare, what are you making as compared to what I'm making? And how do you put together, and we could have a whole episode on, the strategy of putting together an ask for more money. I know, we've talked about that in the past, but now it's kind of like, what do we do to make up the gap, and try to do it in as much of an accelerated way as we can, since we are looking at retirement being in our near future. I mean, I would hope in the next 5-10 years, some women in their 50s are looking at retiring. You don't want to work until you're 75 and 80 years old, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, two things that, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying there is I honestly think you and I get along really well because we're very similar in our demeanor, and, we speak frankly and we speak openly, and we speak with boldness. And I remember you used to have that plaque on your desk that said, well-behaved women rarely make history. I love that's one of my favorite things about you. And I always use that when I talk about Lori Dottie. But what I would say to that is, I think you and I were always drastically treated different when we were in higher ed together. A lot of times you would be treated like you were a troublemaker. We could be in meetings and you would say something, and you'd be treated like you were a troublemaker, or that you were, trying to make waves, or blah, blah, blah. And I could literally repeat the same thing you said, and everybody would be like, oh, I love Terry. He's so strong and assertive, and, he's such a teddy bear, and blah, blah, blah. So one of the things that I think we also need to make sure, just to kind of piggyback on what you said, is that we create an environment where we start to shape that negativity into positivity, to where, men and women both have a responsibility to stand up and challenge those sort of stereotypes. And when you see it, to call it out, like you and I always did for each other.
Yeah.
But,
for sure.
when Yeah, and so I think, as we move toward that, we're continuously working on, improving the society that we live in. When we get to those efforts, that'll help improve it to make it easier for women to talk about that kind of stuff and to be able to be assertive and not have it affect their career negatively.
Yeah, and
Now,
I work with women now exclusively in what I do with, our 12-week program and helping women with, managing these kinds of situations with their stressful jobs and their weight loss and their health, mental and physical health. But, and I almost hesitate to say this, but it's a reality. So I'm going to say it. But one of, I think, the biggest problems that as women we create for ourselves is that we enable this culture of holding women back. And that's in part because, like you mentioned, we would help each other out, but there is a reality to the fact that women are pitted against each other out there
Absolutely.
in the workforce. And so it has created a situation, I believe, where oftentimes, especially high achieving, intelligent women, who, educated women who are at those higher executive levels in particular, there's almost like a competition that's been created around them. So instead of working together and helping to push each other up, they pull each other down, and they don't stand up for each other, and they won't stick their neck out when they know someone is not being treated right, and they don't band together, and instead there's this divisiveness among women, this competition. And I really do believe that while that's not specifically what we're talking about today, it certainly contributes to these inequities in terms of salary and financial planning. And then we also live longer. So if everybody needs to have more money stock, right, we need to have it because we're going to outlive you dudes, and we need to have money to be able to thrive, for longer.
Absolutely.
So you combine the fact that we aren't as prepared financially for retirement with the fact that we live longer and we actually need more money. It's kind of like a double whammy, right?
Right. And, you'd ask me kind of what are some things that you can do at 50 to kind of start getting ready. I think two of the most important things are budget. Like, I'm surprised, regardless of gender, how many people I talk to when we're getting ready to start some financial planning that have never sat down and just listed go through their bank statements and list every single thing that they spend into a spreadsheet. Because I often find $100 to $250 in hidden charges on somebody's account that they weren't aware of. So let's say you sign up for Netflix or for Paramount or something like that. You don't go out and cancel it, and it's just steadily reoccurring on your monthly statement each month. And I mean, you take 5 or 10 of those little streaming services, and you got $100 a month that you're losing before you know it.
Yeah.
So I think budgeting and being concrete and trying to stick to that budget every month is a huge thing. Then secondly is knowing what your goals are. Like, how much money will you need in retirement?
Yeah.
And start making a plan. Because, like, for instance, one of the things when I talk to clients that I ask them, I'll say, like, Lori, when you retire, what does retirement look like to you? And they often have no idea, and I'm like, well, do you want to travel? And they're like, yeah, I really do. I'd love to be able to travel and go to Colorado and see my grandkids. And I'd be like, okay, well, how much does it cost for you to go see your grandkids? And they're like, oh, I don't know, a couple $100. Well, when we start putting in the actual numbers, if you want to travel, it can be, thousands of dollars. And so you have to really start planning for that now in your 40s and your 50s to be ready for that at 65 and build that into your budget. And so then you need milestones. You need 3, 6, 9, and 12-month annual milestones that you're looking at to make sure that you're meeting those goals. So I'll give you a great example of that. My best friend one of my other best friends is a financial advisor. And I sat down with him at 30 years old, and I was paying into TRS, and I thought I was going to be totally fine. And, there's a number of simulations that we run at Edward Jones to see if you're going to meet your retirement goals. We set the amount that you'll need, the amount you're contributing now, the trips, the special stuff that you want to do when you retire. I was only 36% likely to make my retirement goals at 30 years old. I thought I was going to be totally fine because I was thinking, oh, I'll have TRS in my highest 5 years and blah, blah, blah. And I was shocked. And I went back and I made that monthly budget, and I said, and it told me, it's like, if you want to retire and you have $10,000 a month, $5,000 a month, it tells you how likely you are. That is the power of working with the financial advisor,
Yeah.
because you just simply don't know sometimes what you don't know. And the more info you have to be able to meet those milestones and to be checking them regularly so that if you get off track, you can catch it much more quickly. I think that's a big part of it. And then the last thing is emergency needs. Insurance, life insurance, and long-term care are going to be two of the most critical factors for anybody, regardless of gender, when you get ready to retire, because 67% of Americans are going to require long-term care at some point in their life.
We're
And
just
so when
gonna live,
people
we're
hear
gonna live longer. And so the likelihood of
you
needing,
are
right,
absolutely, absolutely, and people tend to think that long-term care means, oh, I don't want to live in a retirement home, so I'll be fine. But like, take my grandmother for instance. Before she passed away, she tripped and fell over her living room carpet rug and broke her leg, and she had to spend 6 to 8 weeks in a medical rehab facility to be able to rehab her leg, and Medicare doesn't cover that. And
Yeah.
so if you don't have supplemental insurance like Advantage or long-term care rider on your life insurance policy, you end up having to pay that out of pocket.
Yeah. My
And so
mom,
that
in
sort of
fact,
emergency planning.
that's a really, sorry to cut you off there. My
Yeah,
mom
no.
that's a perfect example that I can relate to right now, because she's going through getting she's a retired teacher. So, she has her teacher retirement, which in Texas, you guys all over the country, it's different, I know, but in Texas, teacher retirement's not the best retirement plan for people. But she retired, after spending, 30 some odd years in education, and she is now looking at supplemental insurance policies so she can do things like, even not just emergency things, but like get her glasses every year.
Yeah.
And are those nuances of, things that you just think are of courses that insurance would pay for, that don't when you get to that
Right.
age, right? The other thing I want to ask you, you mentioned life insurance, and it's always been very confusing to me. And I imagine there are people listening who are wondering about this. Like, you'll hear people who say insurance is a scam, or you'll hear people who say you need this kind of life insurance versus term life versus whole life. Like, what can you give us kind of a down and dirty on, like, which one do you actually need?
Right, right. And so, and I think that the insurance as a scam myth is one of the most harmful myths, because what ends up happening is, like, I'll give it a great example. My wife was coming to drop something off to me at work, and she was in the left turn lane and went to turn left, and the person went straight, hit her door. She wasn't hurt. It was a very minor accident. But my wife was like, well, I don't know if we should claim this on our insurance, And I'm like, no, that's why you pay for insurance, is so that you can have it.
Insurance will go up if you make a claim, right?
Right, but that's why and it does, but it'll go back down too. And so one of the things is that people sometimes don't see insurance as an investment vehicle, as a way to build up cash for retirement.
Interesting.
Because a lot of times what you end up doing is you have a term life policy through your employer, and it's for a set amount of time. It's 5, 10, 25 years. And then what ends up happening is you get to retirement and you're 65, and your term life insurance runs out. Well, then it's much more difficult to get insured, because you're not as likely to be as healthy. And so getting, like, one of the best things that you can do is getting a variable universal life, or some sort of universal life, or a whole life policy, and build that cash value. Because a lot of times what you can do is you can even do a life insurance retirement plan where you can, whereas in an IRA, you can only contribute like $6,500 a year into your IRA. But, with the life insurance retirement plan, you can contribute as much as you can afford. And then what you do is you just let that cash value build up like a whole life policy. And then when you turn 65, you just start taking distributions from it.
Nice.
And then, and on the whole life and the variable universal life, those insurance, it builds up a cash value, so that, like, if you needed, money for, let's say you had a $250,000 or a $500,000 policy, and you had $250,000, you needed money for an emergency, you can take that money out as a loan, or you can borrow against the cash value. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility about what you do. But every person listening to this podcast should probably have some sort of whole life insurance policy that's going to be 7 times your annual salary. And the reason I say that is because, God forbid, if you're married or you have children and something happens to you, you really need your life insurance policy, whatever that may be, to fill in the gap in your income for 7 years. So that if your husband passes away, you're not going to immediately go from being $150,000 income family to, $50, $60, $70, $100,000, where you're going to lose 50 to 70% of the income that's coming in. And that way, what that does is it gives you that money and it gives you that opportunity to offset that loss in income so that you can continue to live the life you're accustomed to until you get to the point to where you can recoup that income on your own.
Yeah. And that's great advice. That's one thing that, Roger and I have done right is we always got 7 times. And I know sometimes you have to go through additional health checks. You might have to actually have a physical or have someone come and draw blood and do those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
To be able to get those maximums, but it's definitely worth it. And therein lies a plug too for keeping yourself healthy while you are getting to this age of retirement. Because of things like that, you can get much better plans, policies, lower rates for those kinds of things the healthier you are. And it really does.
Absolutely.
But let me ask you this. So I think a lot of people listening to this will be able to relate to this scenario. So for example, in my situation, I was married before, had kids, was a single mom. Roger too, he was married and so we had kind of this period of screwing up when we were younger, right? And so we got our shiz together and got together as a couple when we were in our 30s. We were together for longer than that, but we didn't actually get married until we were in our 30s. So what about those women who have either had a spouse who passed away and, has been alone for 20 years or whatever, or maybe remarried, things like divorce, things that put those big gaps and kind of put you behind even farther than just the things that we're talking about in terms of salary. What are good tips or different, maybe some advice you could give for how to address those potential gaps that have been created from, or maybe even going to college later in life, right? Your kids got out, your kids got older, and then you went to college and didn't start your career until much later. Are there some things that we can do to kind of like fill that gap?
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really important is just benefit claims, is looking and being savvy about what you're entitled to, either as a divorcee or as if some like your husband or your passes away, something like that. Because for instance, if you're married for more than 10 years, then you have a right to a spouse's retirement income. So that could be their 401k, their social security, any IRAs that they have, and that can help supplement your income. I think the other thing is just asset management. Thinking about, are you in the right types of asset classes? So for instance, a lot of times when people go through a divorce or a death in the family, they're reluctant to let go of the family home. And what ends up happening is they go from a 2-income family and to a 1-income family in a house that they can't really afford. And so a lot of times, or a car that they no longer need, they're driving, a gas guzzling SUV, even though their kids are grown. And so looking at those types of assets and how you can flip those assets, like for instance, if you have a home and you're behind, think about how much home do you need, because you can sell that home, downsize, take the difference in the income that you make and the sell value of the home, put that towards your retirement, and be much, much further ahead. Because a lot of times, we're living in homes that we simply can't afford, between the tax burden and the upkeep and things of that nature. So I think those are really 2 easy things that you can do. The other thing is just try to get out of debt. Tackle your debt early as quickly as you can. If you can double up on your student loan payments, your credit card debts, talk to a financial planner and look at your debt and put together, whether you use like a snowball plan where you start with your smallest one and then you pay it off. And once you pay it off, take what you paid on that and then combine it with what you're paying on the next level debt and pay that off and get out of debt as quickly as you can. Because the quicker that you can supersize your contributions to your retirement plan, the more quickly you can catch up.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And one thing I'll tack on there, and you tell me if I'm wrong-headed in this thinking. When we were looking at paying off debt, because we don't believe in having credit card debt, that's one of the biggest scams I think there can be out there. Of course we have credit cards, but we put things on credit cards, we pay them off. We don't pay those extreme interest rates. And that's kind of my point, is when we were looking at paying off debt, we had some debt that had like barely any kind of interest rate on it at all. And I was like, let's pay it off, pay it off, pay it off. And Roger was like, we could take the money, instead of putting it toward that, continue. We've got for example, like my student loan has no interest left on it at all. It's just principal. So instead of paying that off, we've taken money and put into high yield accounts and things like that, because I mean, it really doesn't get us ahead, in my view,
Yeah.
to pay off. Is that right
Yeah.
headed to look at the interest rates that you're paying on different things and really like tackle the ones with the highest rates first?
Yeah. I mean, it really, I mean, there's several ways that you can go about it. You know, a lot of times with the higher rate, you do want to get out from under the higher rate, because, you know, some credit cards can be 24% now.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
that makes it almost impossible to pay on principal. You know, the if you're paying $150 a month on your credit card bill and your interest rate's 24%, I mean, that you're basically just paying the interest each month and maybe paying $10 or $15
Yeah.
on the actual
It's a vicious
principal.
cycle.
It is. And then exactly kind of what you thought of, what you just talked about. Look at the ways that you can leverage the money that you're not using to pay on your debt to get a higher rate of return. Like, for instance, you know, a lot of people don't understand, whenever you are in like an IRA or something like that, a lot of times you can take like a margin loan on your retirement accounts to be able to pay off your credit card debts. And the margin loan that you would take on your retirement accounts will be significantly less than what you're paying. Like it'll,
Yeah.
you know, it depends, varies by, but it'll usually be between 8 and 15%, whereas it'll be 25% for a credit card. But here's what they don't tell you is, a lot of times the dividends and interest that you get from your investments can go and help you pay back that margin loan, in addition to the
Wow.
cash that you're going to put toward it too.
Yeah.
So, and then on top of that, a lot of the investment vehicles that are available, if you work with a financial advisor, can pay you a lot higher rate of return. So for instance, like if you have money in your savings account, a lot of times in the bank, it's only paying you 1.15%. You're making less than 1% return on that. You could take and put that in a CD, a money market mutual fund. A lot of low risk options are out there right now that are paying a 5% return, you know?
Wow.
And so you've got $30,000 just sitting in the bank, you know? I mean, for instance, if you had $100,000 saved up in the bank right now and you just brought it to Edward Jones and said, put it in a money market account, they would pay you $5,000 a year just to hold your money. And that's the benefit of working with a financial advisor.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so many investment vehicles out there to put your money to work for you that are not extremely risky. It's not, I mean, you see a lot of jokes in social media and stuff about, you know, losing your money in the market, but it's much
Yeah.
more difficult to do that than people tend to think. And, you know, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of money each month to support your retirement. A lot of times to fully fund an IRA, it's $541 a month. And if you even do less than that, I mean, take a $10,000 investment right now on average, you know, if you get a 7.5% return in the market, which is what we've averaged since 2000, you know, that 10,000 will grow to $75,000 in 25 years. So,
Well,
I mean,
and
it's just a real.
let me ask you this, because I think one of the reasons, you know, you talked about women not talking about money and not being you know, as inclined to get help with finances. Let me ask you this, because I think part of that comes from, well, let me give you my background, my example. So, you know, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. I know you didn't either. So financial literacy around wealth was not something that I heard conversations around. It wasn't something that was kind of, you know, passed down. My parents invested in their wealth while I was growing up, right? I mean, they were able to get to the place where they are now, but they weren't there when they were raising me, right? So for those of us who didn't grow up in families who had money, and it is not an of course that we understand how all that works, I think our mindset is that getting financial planning is for the quote unquote rich people. It costs a lot of money to go to a financial planner. So can you break down some of that, you know, the myths and realities, you know, truths around, is it expensive to work with someone like you? What kind of, like, what are the benefits? What does it cost me to come and have you help me, Terry?
You're right. Yeah. So, I mean, it varies on what type of investment strategy you want to use, you know, but for most of the financial firms that you'll go and visit with, you know, the industry average is about 1.35%. And so, you know, if you, whatever the total assets you have under management, it'll be, you know, about 1% to 1.5% of that total
Wow,
cost,
that's
which
way lower
nine
than
times
I
out
would
of
have
10,
thought.
oh yeah, and 9 times out of 10, that is more than covered in the returns that you're going to get annually.
Yeah,
Like I
sure.
said, the average, is 7.5% right now. And, and there's been years where the return has been much higher than 7.5%, but it just varies year to year,
What
over
about the
time.
risk?
But,
Is it risky for me to come
mm,
and talk with you and have you help me do planning?
no, I mean, your initial consultation is always free. And so you can come and sit down and you can decide. And I think one of the most important parts of that process is finding somebody that you feel comfortable talking to, that you can feel like you can share what your challenges and what your goals are. Because if you're not honest, it's like going to a therapist. If you're not honest with your financial advisor about your spending, about your income, about all that, you're not going to get the help that you need, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is risk is kind of like riding a roller coaster. And so, at Edward Jones, we have a risk tolerance questionnaire that every client fills out. And so, like me and my daughter, when we ride a roller coaster, it can't go fast enough. It can't flip. It can't turn enough. I love it. Like,
Yeah.
let's go
Yeah.
fast. But not everybody, like my wife, for instance, doesn't like roller coasters at all. Like she don't want to get on it. So she's going to be on the baby roller coaster. Investing is a lot like that. There are investment vehicles out there that you can go fast, you can risk a lot, and you can lose a lot. But there's also investment vehicles out there that are for those middle of the road people that are like, you know what? I don't really want to lose, my retirement. So, put me in something that's more secure, that's going to give me a safe, consistent rate of return without all the volatility of, my portfolio going up and down all the time, right? And
Mhm.
so it's just about finding that financial advisor that you feel comfortable talking to, who gives you good advice and that you feel like you can trust, and figuring out what your goals are. Because one of the things I try to tell my clients all the time is there is no cookie cutter approaches to planning your retirement and to investing. What I
Yeah.
really need to know are what your goals are. What do you want to do with this money? And when do you need it? And what kind of returns are you looking to get? And then gather information, ask a lot of questions, do a lot of probing. And then once I get a good sense of what your goals are, then I say, oh, yeah, we have an investment strategy here that we can put together, to meet your goals, and to where that you're not going to be on that roller coaster riding it faster than you want to go, but
Mhm.
also be able to build some wealth so that you can retire comfortably and not have to worry about outliving the wealth that you build. And then also working with you to put an estate plan together. So, that way, if something
Yeah.
does, God forbid, happen to you, who do you want your money to go to and why? And then, okay, well, let's partner with an estate attorney, let's partner with a CPA, let me quarterback that team, and let's talk about how we can do the most effective transmission of your wealth to a treasured loved one, because taxes are the largest eroder of wealth. And so
I'm
you need to.
so glad you brought this up. But this
Mhm,
is a conversation that, none of us really want to have it, but it's
mhm,
so imperative that we plan for that. And you
mhm.
can't be too young to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
We're talking about, women in our 40s and 50s, but you really can't be too young to have that
Mhm,
conversation. And we're also of the age where a lot of us have parents are getting
mhm,
where they're getting to the stage where maybe they didn't have that planning done, and now they're facing perhaps passing down land, a home, some
mhm,
financials, assets that they have to us. And if they don't
mhm.
have that set up in the right way, then we may take a huge hit on that money, that land, that house, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
And again, not having lived that life of, people passing money down for generations, we don't know what we
Mhm,
don't know about it. And so talking to somebody like you who can really help us
mhm.
not only plan for retirement, but like you said,
Yeah.
plan for, the unfortunately the inevitable, but
Mhm.
we never know when it's coming, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and so the other thing that I would say about that too is like, think about when you get to retirement. Think about how to leverage those pre-tax and after-tax contributions, because when you get to retirement, you're going to have to pay taxes on your retirement income if you don't start planning early. And so what ends up happening is you get to 65, and when people ask me, well, why should I invest? And I give them the same answer every time, because the future will always and forever be more expensive than the present.
Yeah.
Inflation, the money you have now is not going to buy as much whenever you're 65. So you need to grow that wealth to account for that difference in the rising price of inflation. So what ends up happening is I start trying to caution my clients at 50 to start transitioning as much of their finances that are in pre-tax contributions to after-tax contributions. So meaning like a Roth IRA is something that you can contribute to so that when you get to retirement, you can have tax-free distributions. So when you have to take money to supplement your income, the government doesn't take 22, 32, 42% of it. And you can start doing that in increments yearly so that the tax burden doesn't eat you up. That's one of the easiest ways to maximize the money that you will have in retirement, by maximizing those after-tax contributions, so
Wow.
that when you get to 65, much more of that is coming out, and the government is not taking 22% out of it and keeping it in their
Yeah.
pocket.
See, and it, and that seems like, I mean, it's just like when you say that, it seems like, oh my gosh, there's like so much opportunity. But again, it goes back to, you don't know what you don't know unless you
You don't know.
talk to
That's right.
somebody like you. And even thinking about, because I didn't plan on retiring when I did, right? And even, thinking about, okay, is my age appropriate? What age should I retire? When can I retire to be able to maximize, the benefits that I have, how much that will cost, doing things like you just talked about, so that when I do need that money to what am I trying to say? When I do need that money to subsidize, my retirement income, this is the best way to do it. I mean, there's just so much opportunity for us to kind of catch up and do so much better with our money. But if we don't have a conversation with someone like you, we just don't know. And I think there's a lot of fear around money and retirement. And it's one of those things where we kind of sometimes let fear prevent us from stepping forward and doing something about it, almost like it's down the road. I don't know enough about it to do it now. And I'll just wait. And really every day and month, year that we put it off puts us at a disadvantage. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I guess, if we were going to kind of wrap this up, why don't you share with people, like, what is it? And I know, if they're listening from, Canada, they might not travel here to talk with you, but people in the local DFW and surrounding areas here in Texas, or maybe you tell me, maybe that, you work with people even farther away than that, but tell people, like, what is the best way to get in touch with you? What can you do? What would you do? How will that kind of work to make people feel comfortable to reach out and start the conversation?
Yeah, so the main thing is I'm registered, I have my Series 7, my Series 66, so I'm registered in Texas, but I can do business if I'm registered in your state. So if somebody out of state wanted to contact me, I just have to make sure I'm registered in their state. And then if I'm not, I'll just have to get registered. It's usually I go on our website and I click a link to request registration. But I mean, my office is in Garland, but I work with people all over the state, all over the country. I mean, we can meet like, the online version, we can do this by Zoom, we can meet by phone. And, being able to transfer money through ACH and do all that stuff because of COVID has gotten a lot simpler. So I work with a lot of people that I don't meet with face to face regularly. I mean, I have clients that are in, Virginia, Maryland, Illinois, and it's just, figuring out how to have that regular meeting schedule that you need to make sure that we're successful. But the easiest way to find me is just to Google Terry Peterman, Edward Jones, and you'll find my website, and then you can just give me a call, and we can set up an initial appointment.
If it's okay with you, and I think we chatted a little bit about this beforehand, but we'll put your contact information in the show notes. So if you're listening, look in the show notes, and we'll put his website and his phone number, and his title and all of that stuff, so that you guys can get in touch with him. And I'll tell you, in terms of trust, I think, this, again, it's one of these, your health, your money, I mean, your kids, these are the kinds of things that you really do want to make sure that you talk with somebody who is a trusted advisor. And I would not have Terry on this call if I didn't feel comfortable saying to everybody who can hear our voice.
Ask them about their licensure for sure. Are they because a lot of times you'll meet with like somebody who might be a financial planner, or they might be an investment advisor representative. And those are not people that are registered financial advisors. And they usually don't have the Series 7, so they can't trade securities. They're not registered with the state. And they often can be, kind of the fly by. I'll put together a financial plan, and then they'll charge you a gross amount just to input your expenses into an Excel spreadsheet. you
Yeah.
know?
And one of the things that I can say about Terry is that I would have not 1 ounce of concern about taking advice from him, knowing that he's going to give you the best advice. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the things about you, Terry, is not only would you give somebody the shirt off your back,
Mhm.
but you would do things for people that put you at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, I do.
and I mean, you're just that
Yeah.
kind of a guy. And,
Mhm.
just a loyal friend and a really good, solid human being.
Mhm.
And so anybody listening, like reach out to, Terry will answer questions for you, even if
Yeah,
you already have someone
absolutely.
you're working with. If you have
Mhm.
questions, if you want to, just like touch base with him about something,
Yeah,
definitely reach out. He's like a
absolutely.
solid guy.
One of the things I would say is a lot of times, even if you don't do business with me, you can never have too much good financial advice.
Yep.
So even if you're already working with an advisor, call and get a second opinion and make sure the work that they're doing is beneficial, because oftentimes I see people that are with other companies and they bring me their portfolios, and somebody hasn't really done anything with their portfolio in 10 years. They've just been letting it roll and not making changes for the interest rates rising or things of that nature. So you can never have too much good financial advice. Talk to somebody. But the second thing that I would say is that I can't guarantee anybody a specific rate of return, but what I can guarantee is that nobody will care more about you and your family than I do.
Yeah.
And I take this job very seriously. I love people. I feel like being a financial advisor is very similar to my background in education. I'm just educating people about their finances now, and about how to make sure that they get to the point where they have enough wealth that they don't outlive it. And so, I would just say that, reach out to somebody and talk to somebody, find somebody that you trust that you can work with, and get that financial advice, because you can never have too much good financial advice.
That's absolutely true. And I love that you talked about it in that way, because we've both had this sort of evolution in our careers. And I say
Mhm.
the same thing. Like I'm still teaching. My classroom just looks
Mhm.
different, and it's filled with all women now
Absolutely.
who are over 40 instead of, grad school students. So and I love that. I think I really do believe that your path has been purpose led, just like mine has. And I think your
Absolutely.
background makes you a much stronger, better financial
Mhm.
advisor, because you do have that education background. It's such a solid foundation
Mhm.
for not just doing things with people's money, but educating them about why you're doing it, why this is the best decision, presenting them with a variety of different options,
Mhm.
and really being able to give them not just the what they need to do, but how and why they need to do it. And I think that's one of your really strong points, and I really admire that about you.
Mhm.
We could talk all day, but I
Mhm.
know people are not going to listen to us yap all day. So I want us to wrap up. But I want to thank you so much. And
Mhm.
again, I mean, first guest, first time we're doing this. So we had some technology kinks, folks, to work at the beginning of this, because we're a couple of old people, recording a
Yeah.
podcast. But I'm super, super glad. And I want to thank you for being here today. Terry, I think the world of you. And
Yeah.
just thanks so much for doing this. And
Yeah.
we're going to put in the show notes how to get in touch with Terry. Absolutely reach out to
Mhm.
him. You can't find a better
Mhm.
guy to talk to.
Mhm.
Thank
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Lori. I love you too. You're my best friend. You've been my mentor for 20 years. And,
you.
like you said, ride or die, kid. We've always been ride or die.
Yeah, absolutely. Love you. Have a great weekend. We're recording this on
Mhm.
the Thursday or Friday before 4th of July weekend. And you guys be safe. Tell your
Mhm.
beautiful family I said hello. And we've got to get together soon. We'll have a pool day. How about that?
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds great to me.
Awesome. All right. Love you. And you
Uh,
guys, thanks for tuning in.
Love you
And
too.
I'll see you right back here next week. Bye.